welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, as the EU debates whether to seize 210 billion euros in frozen Russian central bank assets, Germany and Belgium are urging caution. Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Prime Minister Bart Wever argue that such a move could trigger legal challenges and undermine global trust in European financial systems. Joining us today on TVP World to break down this high-stakes dilemma is Tom Keatinge, Director of the Center for Finance and Security at the Royal United Service Institute, a leading voice on the intersection of sanctions, finance, and national security. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So my gut instinct when it comes to utilizing frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine is that, well, if it were that easy, it probably would have been done already. Now, Germany and Belgium are resisting the outright seizure of Russian states' assets, despite the pressure of other allies. Does it highlight the actual kind of logistic difficulty?
Frankly, it's a stain on the European Union that it has not yet figured out how to do this. There are plenty of smart ways this could have been done. Indeed, there have been some progress with some money from the Russian central bank assets provided to Ukraine over the last 18 months or so. But Germany and Belgium in particular, I think, hold responsibility here because the longer we sit on our hands and do not use those assets, the longer we as European taxpayers will have to be funding Ukraine's defense. And that's crazy when you think of all that money that's lying there in Belgium.
Right. Now, speaking of the Belgian Prime Minister, his argument was, well, he used it as a kind of analogy of a goose that lays golden eggs, saying that we shouldn't just gut it. Do you think that it has any grounds to stand on?
No, I mean, I think the position of the Belgian Prime Minister should be called into question, and frankly, I think should be viewed as being self-serving. Let's face it, Euroclear is based in Belgium. Euroclear pays a lot of tax to the Belgian government. And of course, Belgium has a personal interest in ensuring that the assets stay at Euroclear. Now, of course, there may be potential legal challenges, but the reality is it's not surprising that Belgium is speaking up, because Belgium does stand to lose tax revenue if these assets were to be used in a smarter way to benefit Ukraine.
All right, can you help us unpack a little bit the Euroclear system and how does that influence Belgium's position in particular? Is it mostly due to the fact that they do stand to benefit from having this large sum of Russian assets sitting there?
Well, I mean, think about it from a personal perspective. If you've got, if you're lucky enough to have $1 million in the bank and that $1 million is earning interest, there are two organizations that benefit. One is the bank, where you keep that money because they can use that money to make investments and loans and so on. But the other, of course, is the government of the country where your bank sits, because when you earn interest, when the bank makes profit with your money, that is a source of tax revenue for the country. So if suddenly $210 billion were to disappear, that's a lot of lost tax revenue and opportunity for Euroclear. I mean, I feel sorry for Euroclear in all of this because they are essentially a political football. They're a neutral entity. They have no decision-making power in all of this at all. It fundamentally comes down to whether the EU 27 can agree that the right thing to do is to use more of those funds to support Ukraine than has been the case so far.
Well, now let's turn our attention to Germany's position. Chancellor Merz also warned of capital flight if EU seizes Russian funds. How realistic is that risk?
Well, let's remember 10 or 15 years ago, the Eurozone faced a very material crisis of confidence in what was then a relatively young currency. And we all remember the sovereign debt crisis at that time. So there is a form of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, amongst European policymakers, particularly finance ministers and people like the president of the European Central Bank, whose job it is to secure the integrity of the euro. And so inevitably, they are concerned that if the EU were to reach into Euroclear and take those assets for the benefit of Ukraine, people might start to distrust the integrity of the euro. Now, that frankly, I think is a farcical position to take, because the point of maximum risk, in a way, for the euro and the eurozone was back in March, February 2022, when the assets were originally frozen at Euroclear. And the euro is still functioning, as far as I can tell, when I last looked in my wallet. So I think it's a farcical position. It's also concerning because about a year ago, we heard from countries like Saudi Arabia, who were in a way kind of sowing misinformation by saying, well, if you were to move against the Russian central bank assets, we would be concerned about the integrity of the euro. Well, where are they going to put their money instead? Do they want to put it in Chinese RMB? Do they want to put it in, I don't know, Bitcoin? The point is that there aren't any credible options away from the euro. So I think that is a fallacy. And I am disappointed, frankly, that Chancellor Merz is taking that position.
All right, so that begs the question, if Belgium has vested interest in blocking the utilization of frozen Russian assets, why would Germany take this position, even though it, according to some, is sort of a logical fallacy?
Well, I think between them, Germany and France are the backers of the euro, right? So, Christine Lagarde, the president, might be the voice of the eurozone as president of the ECB, but France and Germany are underpin the credibility of the euro. So, I can see that certainly without the support of France and Germany, moving against the Russian central bank assets to benefit Ukraine would be very difficult. On the flip side, if the worst were to occur, and again, let's remember the Eurozone crisis of 10, 15 years ago, if the worst were to occur, then it would be Germany and France and maybe other Northern European countries like the Netherlands, perhaps, but it would be those big countries that would have to bail out the problem. And they remember having to support other countries across Europe in the Eurozone crisis back in the day. So I can understand why Chancellor Merz would be nervous, but he really needs to get over that. And I would just like to add that, of course, the one name we haven't talked about is Donald Trump. And I'm amazed that Donald Trump hasn't yet realized that there's 200 billion euros of free money lying in Europe, which could be used to support Ukraine.
All right, speaking of Donald Trump and the United States position, do you think that Washington's push for a peace deal might also have any factor when it comes to the decision about utilizing these funds?
Well, there are two answers to that. I think one is the way Donald Trump approaches the Russia issue, be it his unwillingness to unleash sanctions and to follow through on the repeated threats he's made to use economic measures against the Russian Federation, suggests that going after central bank assets is not something he would consider doing, because that's obviously a very tough position to take. On the flip side, it was interesting to hear President Zelensky in his recent visit to Washington, D.C., committing to buy, I think it was $100 billion of US weapons. Now, I thought when I heard that, and are we now going to hear from Ursula von der Leyen or from Chancellor Merz or others who then visited Donald Trump, that purchase of American weapons would be made with Russian central bank money? That didn't happen. But, I wonder whether there's something going on in the background along those lines.
All right. Now, this topic about utilizing frozen Russian assets has been kind of on the table for quite a while now. There's months of talks, negotiation, debate, statement, but at the end of the day, the European Commission seems quite powerless to actually push this through. Is it a consensus issue, or are there any legal hurdles in the way that is making this so hard to actually kind of put into practice?
No, I think the legal arguments have been put to bed a long time ago. If viewers are interested, with my colleague Kinga Redlowska, we wrote an article for Politico laying out a roadmap for how this could be undertaken back in April. So I think the legal arguments have been put to bed. Probably haven't got time to go into the details, but the concept of countermeasures is what's critical here, which is that because Russia has launched a war of aggression against Ukraine, Ukraine can respond as it is doing, obviously militarily, but it can also respond by doing things like appropriating assets of the Russian Federation. So this would be a classic example where countermeasures could be used by which Ukraine can take those assets to use them for its defense. Now, countermeasures need to be reversible. There's a kind of wrinkle in there that one would need to work through. But lawyers have put this argument to bed a long time ago. It's purely a matter of political will, and it's high time that the politicians in Europe came to the consensus that these assets should be used to benefit Ukraine.
All right, so harking back to the question, how is it so difficult to push it through? Are Germany, Belgium mostly getting in the way, or are there any kind of EU states that also are sort of questioning this decision?
No, I mean, I think, you've put your finger on the two key issues, which is concern about trust in the euro and loss of kind of tax revenue or damage to the Belgian economy. So it's not surprising that it is Belgium and Germany sounding a note of caution. I would say, as we sometimes say in the UK, they need to put on their big boy pants and realize that actually, if we want to support Ukraine in the way that we consistently commit to support Ukraine and say we want to support Ukraine, then this is the kind of big decision that they need to be willing to take as kind of leaders of democracies. So it's a political issue entirely now. There are market solutions that could be used to structure the way the assets are used, to earn more income from those assets. There are lots of solutions out there. It's just that we need the political leadership to move forward on that.
All right, last but not least, like you mentioned, it is a political issue at this point. Do you think there's any incentivization structure or anything the European Commission can do to nudge these more reluctant countries to actually take a stand?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I say that's why I think, as with all these things, Donald Trump will be very important in all of this. The reality is that we are spending our taxpayer euros on supporting Ukraine, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. But frankly, it doesn't make sense to be spending money hand over fist in support of Ukraine when these 200 or so billion euros are lying there unused or almost entirely unused. And so it's a missed opportunity. As I say, I'm very surprised that this is not something that Donald Trump has zoned in on. But like I say, perhaps that's because he's not in the market of actually acting on his threats against Russia. He's just talking about them.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.